does, or do you have a keyboard player on stage?
We put on an iPod or whatever because, it's too difficult to have an extra guy fly around the country and all that just to do 2 songs out of a set. I mean, Cradle Will Rock and Jump. I mean, I don't know what else we do. But, there's obviously a lot more with our band. That other band's called 5150. So There's a lot more. There's like half the material has got to be tracked because half of it's When It's Love and all that stuff. So it's a lot of free, which they did, I believe.
Right. How did you initially get the gig with the Punks?
So I joined 2007, I think. So it's been a long time. But, okay, so at the time, Ralph Saines was the singer, and they had, same guy except they had a guitar player, Rush Parrish, and he split, so they needed a fill-in for guitar. And I kind of was working a regular job and wasn't really thinking too much about what I was doing at the time in terms of music. I was kind of in a lull. And I heard that my buddies in Southern California, who are all really great players, weren't doing the gig because I knew about the Atomic Punks, and it was like, why aren't you guys going over there and audition? And they're like, you got to learn like all the songs, and it's like 13 songs. And I'm like, well, that sounds amazing. I mean, but I was still pretty stiff when it came to a lot of that material because I haven't played in years. So I just sent a tape to Ralph, and Ralph had me come down the audition, and, they just put me through the coals, man, through the fire, and said, can you be ready in whatever weeks? And I'm like, yeah. I had to take all my vacation time from my job to go over the stuff, and a lot of the guitar stuff, it takes like, a while for those muscles to kind of loosen up and start to play naturally. So it took a while. I mean, I was stuck in the first few months, but I got the hang of it. I guess I was nice enough to hang out with, so they kept me.
In terms of capturing Eddie's sound, how did you go about doing that?
It's interesting because the first thing you got to do in any gig is capture the gig spot. So even though this is a Van Halen tribute band, it's a bona fide live act. So, for example, our drummer doesn't play the stuff exactly like Alex, or our bass player doesn't play every note like Michael, but they do the highlights, and they do it, you're your own person, right? So that's the first thing I kind of learned. For example, the guys previous to me that played with the Punks, they had their own style, and they did their Eddie version, right? So when I came in, I just thought, all right, well, I'm sure the fans of this band want to just hear the record recorded solos. And immediately it was tough because the band plays at a certain tempo. So they did it more at the live Van Halen. So if I went home and worked on the record and then I showed up on stage, it was like, oh shit, this is not working out at all. So you kind of work it out. So once I got the groove in the band, I started realizing I've got to start turning the gain down on the amp, because what Eddie did was he was such a badass that he could really have this honking like he wanted every note to be as clear as a bell, like live, because, he wanted people to hear what he was doing. And his hands are so strong that he could really, really accentuate things. And so the more I would turn this gain down, it's more like the more confidence you get, the less you have to hide some of that fuzz. You start taking it away. And then what my bass player says, he likes it, it's more of a spanky sound, more of a cleaner. And when you listen to a lot of those bootlegs, he sounds like he's playing straight through a plexi, like flat straight.
Right.
And live, like, the Diver Down tour, you can hear, it's just so clean, but you need to have the harmonics. So it's weird. It's like when you have the right kind of room and then the right amp, you'll start getting those tones. And it's a game, dude. All the time, wherever we're playing, I'm trying to find it. So I'm still looking,
Oh, wow. That's incredible. And in terms of your gear, what kind of setup do you have? What is the amount of arsenal you have in terms of your guitars?
I can't really haul a lot of gear around because we're a traveling band, so the only thing I'm able to use on the road is stuff I can fit in an overhead bag. I've tried a lot of the virtual, amp pedals and all that stuff, and it's still like, every time I wind up at a venue, I go to the amp that's got the cleanest, like, kind of spankiest sound, and I just put a little MXR stuff like that. So basically what happened was I ran into a guy, George Tripp, and he does the Way Huge pedals. He works here in L.A. He's in Burbank. He's got a shop there. He's the one that actually was in the room and designed the new pedals with Eddie.
Wow.
Yeah, he's the one that went months and months going through all of his quirky, try this, leave my amp on in a warehouse for 3 months and let it run, that kind of shit, So, he works for Dunlop. So when I met him, he's like, oh, God, what are you using? So he just pulled out a closet full of pedals, and he just gave me like 8 pedals. And those are the ones that I still basically use. I have a pedal board of all the standard stuff. And then anything else that you try to add to it, and when you're trying to get a cleaner sound, like I'm trying to, even just table changes changes the sound. So it starts getting really interesting. So then, okay, so now I've got the pedals, right? It's pretty clean kind of line. And then my guitar sucked. And then there's this guy that was like this retired guy that built Frankenstrats on the East Coast. And he was shipping them to George Trips and making exact replicas. And George is like, hey, Lance is here and he plays in the Punks. And the guy's like, well, let him try one of my guitars. You know, I'll take pictures of it or whatever. And so I started using it, and I've been borrowing the guitar for probably about a decade now. Which is great, you know, but I'm so worried that something's going to happen to it, but it's not mine, but it's the Frankenstrat I use.
Wow. How long have you been in the Punks?
Well, what was 07, 06, 07, so what has it been? Over 10 years, let's see.
Wow.
14 years, something like that.
Okay.
Crazy.
Excellent. So you were in the Punks with Ralph?
I was, yeah,
okay.
For a little over 2 years, 3 years.
Were you there when Michael Anthony played with you guys?
Well, if you look online and you see the House of Blues footage with Michael, that's with Russ, the guy that was in the band before me. But maybe about a year or two in, I mean, Ralph was still in the band. I did play with him. What happened was there was a private party at Yahoo, which is in Burbank. It's like their headquarters, yahoo.com.
Sure.
And they wanted to do like a private party, and it was some kind of, giving tickets away, go to Panama. So they asked us, like, how much would it cost to actually get a Van Halen member to come down to this party? We're like, well, I have no idea, but we do know Doogie, Michael's.
Sure.
So we called him, and Michael was in town. And I think they said, like, well, what would it cost to do, like, 3 songs? And he was like, $5,000 or something like that. And he's like, fuck it. So I show up thinking, we had like some time off. I didn't even rehearse or anything. I'm just showing up to this private party during the weekday. And then Ralph goes, hey, I didn't want to say anything because I know you were going to freak out, but Michael Anthony's going to sit in with it. I'm like, what, dude? Wait, what? And so anyway, we're playing out there at the private party. And then Michael walks in with his daughter. And on the side, I'm just like, oh. And he walks straight to the bar, and he gets a drink, and he starts watching us. And then when he came up on the little stage we had, he just shook my hand, he's like, yeah, sounds great. And he proceeded to play like 5 songs, even more, and the thing about him is when he starts singing and you hear that voice, like we had just this kind of standard backyard party monitor system. He started singing those backgrounds. The monitor started shaking from the power of his voice.
Wow.
And you're like, that's the sound. That's the fucking sound. Like, that guy's voice is incredible, dude. It's like he's got this like bell-like super loud tone, and you could hear it all over the early bootlegs, from 76 on or whatever.
Totally.
Whatever on.
Yeah,
that was the weird part.
Yeah.
And also one other thing real quick. Eddie at the time was pretty out of it. He was drinking a lot and stuff. And
right.
And he was so cool with me. He's like, yeah, it sucks. I'm going to lose my buddy. And he was very concerned about Eddie Tells at the time, which is still endearing for a guy who wasn't around the Van Halen camp, basically, for a long time. But he was very concerned about Eddie's status at the time.
Sure.
And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he's a good-hearted guy, that's for sure. He's known to be.
Yeah, he's the best.
Now, did you know Bart Walsh or Brian Young?
Oh, yeah. Well, let's start with Bart. Bart was, started the band with our drummer. And when I was living in L.A. and I was just a punk kid that moved here, I actually met Bart in some bars. And, he was just this character that was, around town. And he was this real bravado and everything, partying. And so I knew Bart, off and on. And then I didn't really follow the band so much when Bart was early stages. I saw them do 1 or 2 shows with Ralph at the very beginning. I was just like, hey, that's great. And it was, I was off to party in some other place or whatever. But obviously, we kept in touch over the years, the band did. And of course, what happened to him was a complete shock to everyone.
Sure.
So, it's still like, I'm still in shock. But I actually got a call from Brian Young not even a year ago because, Dave was starting up again with his solo project. And, Brian's like Dave's guy. Brian's the call. If Dave really wants someone, he wants Brian, He's so busy in Texas. He's like a bazillionaire now, working with Spasmatics and playing all the time. And so, obviously, he wasn't able to do it, but he got Brett Tuggle. You know who Brett Tuggle is?
Yes, of course. A keyboard player.
Yeah. So Brian kind of got Brett in touch with me, and then I went over to Brett's house. So basically, to make that story short, me and Brian have been kind of, we've known each other first he called me about that, which was really nice because he kind of put me in the loop. And I wound up over at Brett's, and I actually worked on some stuff with Brett because Brett wanted to like learn the rhythm guitar parts because Dave wanted the Vegas thing to be like keyboard but 2 guitars, and he wanted Brett to kind of jump on and play rhythm guitar. Eventually, Brett kind of split the project, obviously, and that was kind of my end as well, you know, because I knew Brett. It's not like, you know, so nothing happened after that for me. But I had a problem with a guitar in Texas once, and I was able to go to Brian. And what was cool is Brian let me borrow his guitar from the Dave shows because he still has the actual guitar he used when he was Dave.
Right.
And he opened the case, and he's like, hey, man, you can use my guitar. And I'm like, oh, thanks. And he hadn't opened the case since the last show with Dave.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was literally like the strings were still rusty from the last show he played with Dave, you know?
Wow.
And it was like, it was so cool. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know of a better Eddie impersonator physically when they play than Brian.
Wow.
Because he was part of like this kind of cult following, you know, Van Halen thing in LA where they were breaking down the bootlegs like note for note. And when he plays, he's doing things that you're like, that's what the fuck Eddie was playing on that like 77 Pasadena record, you know. That's what he was doing. And it's like, yeah, dude, look, it's like his hands were playing it backwards. That's why it sounds so weird. I'm like, how the fuck did you learn that? You know, because
Wow.
we're the same age and we would try to get it off records. But he had like a group of guys that were all kind of, you know, working together on this stuff. It makes sense, right? You know, you have like 3 heads working on this and then you figure it out. That's it, you know? So yeah, I told Brian that, you know, I want to fly back to Texas sometime and literally pick his brain for like a weekend.
We just had Brian on the cast. He was so super nice. We've seen him in concert multiple times. Did you ever consider trying out for the position when Dave was looking for people for Vegas?
Yeah, I mean, look, if David called me, I would be honored to go play with a guy. You know, I never got the official call or anything, so it's not like I'm going to be laying in his yard or anything. I was over at Brett's place. He was really excited about it. He was vetting me a little bit, and it was exciting. And then he was done. You know, he's like, I'm out. I'm back with Lindsey Buckingham. I'm not doing that thing. You know, and that's as far as it got. So, you know, he got a young band of guys, and he can kind of call all the shots. Dave can, and more power to him, you know. He can do what he wants. I mean, I didn't get a chance to see the stuff live, so, yeah. I mean, I got mixed reviews, but I still love the guy because I love Daily Rock, you know.
Right. Well, Dave and I actually went to Vegas, and we saw the whole thing, but he ended up getting rid of some of the younger guys and ended up hiring that guy, Al Estrada, Dave, is it?
Right. Yeah, I know Al very well, yeah.
Okay.
Have you worked with Al?
You know, it's funny, we actually did. I mean, it's actually a small kind of scene here in LA. I mean, you know, when I moved here in '89, and I was 17. You know, the first guy that I ran into, or I basically got on a phone call with, the second guy. First guy I called Paul Gilbert because I had his number, and
wow.
Paul was moving out. Yeah, and Paul was moving out of his apartment, and then I moved in with Russ Parrish. You know, the guy who's in Steel Panther now.
Yeah.
That was my roommate, you know. You know, Ray Luzier came over, and then, you know, Russ played with this guy, Jeff Martin, who was wound up playing drums at Badlands, and I used to go to the Mates rehearsals. And then I got in the band with a guy named Tommy Hendrickson, who's now playing with Alice Cooper.
Wow.
And, you know, Brian is, like, done a million things, and it's like pot of just gold out here of players. So yeah, I mean, like I was on a gig, I was filling in, and I was doing a Vegas thing, and then Al walks up on stage, and he's like, "Hi, I'm Al," and we were doing a co-event for a casino, you know, so I got to know him there and all that. So yeah, it's like, well, it sucks because a lot of guitar players that do what I do, you know, we don't get a chance to hang out on the weekends because we're all doing gigs separately. But it's nice when we're together because we're someone like, dude, I've heard all about you, I've seen you online. And it's so cool that we're doing a gig together tonight because it's rare, you know. I'm trying to think of who else. I don't know where to start. I mean, there's plenty of guys I can yap about out here.
Absolutely.
Did you ever reach out to Bart or any of the other previous players in Atomic Punks when you got the gig and ask them for advice, or Brian for that matter?
I'd have to say no because, okay, so when I joined the band, I didn't know those guys in particular. I mean, I knew Russ, but I knew why Russ wasn't in the band anymore, so it's not, and I know Russ. I mean, I've known him and me have known each other in LA longer than anyone else because we were both kids when we met and we lived together for those few years, so I know Russ. And it's not like I need to even call him about what the deal is. He's one of those guys that are like, go and do your thing. I didn't feel comfortable enough to like kind of cold call those guys, Bart and Brian. I was so wrapped up in my own panic of learning the songs because, as you know,